Welcome back, Sebastian here. So today I want to talk a little bit about Esteban Ocon and his future in Formula One. So of course, the week before the Canadian Grand Prix, Alpine announced that Ocon would be leaving the team at the end of the 2024 season. Alpine and Stone, effectively a team that he's been a part of since 2020. Bit of a surprise move, I guess, to many. Although, given the fictitious relationship off track that he had with his teammate Gasly, plus the incident in Monaco the week before, I think to some observers at least, it was not a massive surprise. But obviously now, he now has to go through the process of trying to find himself a new seat for 2025. I think he's still a very good driver, and I think he really should be on the grid in 2025. But of course, he's also quite polarizing. He's done many things on track, said some things off track that have definitely rubbed people the wrong way, which is something that I understand. But before we take a look, I think the 6 remaining teams that have empty seats for 2025, and kind of ranking them in order of most likely to least likely for Ocon to land a seat with those teams. I want to take a look at Ocon's history in Formula One and just kind of talk about how we got to this point. So for Ocon, he got into Formula One midway through the 2016 season, replacing Indonesian driver Rio Haryanto at Manor. Of course, Manor is a team that fell off the grid at the end of that season, and they're no longer a part of the sport. But for that half season with Manor, his teammate was Pascal Wehrlein, and of course Wehrlein had been part of that team all year. So as you would expect, the stats are not super good for that year. Median qualifying delta here, and my Z-score for my race model. For here, a positive is a bad thing. For the race Z-score, a positive is a good thing. And of course in blue, I've just gotten the traditional points head-to-head underneath. So against Wehrlein, median qualifying delta was 0.329 seconds, not terrible. Z-score for the race model was a negative 0.523, so about half a standard deviation, which again is not too bad either. And because it was a Manor very poor car, points head-to-head was 0-0 in that half season. Then 2017, Ocon lands himself a seat with Force India, a pretty good team, going up against Sergio Perez. That first year was pretty decent. Median qualifying delta plus 0.073, so out-qualified on average by Sergio Perez. Race Z-score also in the negative 0.458, but honestly not too bad against a driver in Sergio Perez who's rated pretty well. Traditional points head-to-head was 87 to 100. Then 2018, their second year as teammates together. Ocon actually out-qualifies Perez, out-qualifying him by a margin of 0.131. And then for the Z-score, positive 0.31. So even though Ocon lost the points head-to-head 49 to 62, because of other factors I take into account like average finishing position, he actually ends up in the positive overall. Of course though, despite the fact that he had a really good year, Ocon loses his seat at Force India to Lance Stroll. That summer of 2018, of course, the Force India team went into administration. The team was bought by Lawrence Stroll, the father of Lance Stroll. And of course, Stroll moved over into that seat, into that team from Williams for 2019. And it was confirmed pretty late that Perez would be the driver joining him at the team. So it was actually a toss-up between the two as to which would get that seat at what would then be Racing Point. But nonetheless, Ocon loses that battle for that seat, and he is forced to take a year off as Mercedes reserve and test driver. That's why the 2019 is blank. But he was able to get back on the grid in 2020, replacing Nico Hülkenberg at Renault. And at Renault, going up against Daniel Ricciardo, that first year was pretty rough. Median qualifying delta was 0.2 seconds, so 0.2 of a second. Z-score negative 1.330, which is easily the worst number on this board. It was just a pretty tough year. I remember that year pretty well. It just felt like Ocon just, in both qualifying and in the races, he just wasn't able to get to the same positions that Ricciardo was. And because, of course, that was the year that Ferrari had their absolute disaster of a year, it meant that there was a lot more points, higher points paying positions that were up for grabs. And Ricciardo was pretty opportunistic in getting those big points. So at the end of the year, the points head-to-head that year were 62 to 11, 119. But Ricardo has elected to go to McLaren for 2021. So Renault rebranded to Alpine, bring in two-time world champion Fernando Alonso, who had of course originally retired at the end of 2018. So 2 years together with Alonso. First year 2021 was out-qualified on average, but a very, very small margin, 0.006. Our race Z-score, negative 0.182, and he loses the points battle 74 to 81. To be fair, even though it was Alonso's first year after 2 years away, it is Fernando Alonso. It's still a very, very high benchmark. Then 2022, bit of a strange year. Of course, Alonso announces midway through the year he'd be going to Aston Martin, and then there was a lot of squabbling at the team, especially between Alonso and the team about getting engines and stuff. So Alonso out-qualified again by Alonso. Margin is bigger than it was the year before. Alonso, I guess, settling back into F1. 0.161 seconds was the median qualifying gap that second year. In the race model, the Z-score negative 0.259, so actually worse than 2021, despite the fact that Ocon gets more points than Alonso, 92 to 81 in Ocon's favor there. So of course, Alonso going to Aston Martin, new teammate comes in, 2023, and this time it's Pierre Gasly, his old arch nemesis from the karting days. And to be honest, I think Gasly had a pretty strong first year. Ocon was on average out-qualified by Gasly, 0.106 seconds, and in the race model, he actually was in the positive 0.124, so very, very close there. Does lose the points head-to-head, 58 to 62, but overall very, very close between Ocon and Gasly. Of course, the other part of this is that in 2021, about halfway through the season, I believe it was the French Grand Prix actually, then CEO of Alpine, Laurent Rossi, basically decided to give Ocon a 3-year contract extension. So that would be 2022, 23, and this year 24. And I remember everyone at the time thought it was absolutely ludicrous that you would give a driver of Ocon's caliber, not saying he's a bad driver, but that you would give a driver, basically a midfield driver, a 3-year contract extension when traditionally it's like a 1 or a 2. So that of course is a contract that's ended this year, and he's now kind of been left as a free agent. Now, of course, the other piece of the story with Ocon is that he definitely does have a history of getting into issues with his teammates. At Force India, multiple incidents in 2017, crashed in with his teammate in Azerbaijan, in Belgium, had a scuffle at the Canadian Grand Prix that year as well. At Renault, nothing with Ricardo. Honestly, they were too far apart on track to really crash into each other. With Alonso, we know there was at least one incident. I remember the one in Brazil. And then at Alpine, of course, the crash in Australia 2023, of course, that was Gasly's fault. There was the Miami Grand Prix this year where they basically raced each other extremely hard for the entire first lap. And then there was Monaco where Gasly, of course, was taken out by Ocon on the opening lap again. So you definitely have a driver who basically has had incidents with 3 of his 5 teammates in Formula 1. And you have team principals like James Vowles coming on the record and basically saying, we want a guy who's going to be a team player, who's going to be able to integrate into the team. And Ocon's at this point has definitely built up a reputation of being a guy who races his teammates extremely hard, ignoring team orders, that kind of thing. And it's definitely something that you don't want to have when you're a free agent trying to convince other teams to sign you. So finishing off this video, going over the 6 remaining teams and what I would say is the most likely teams to sign him for 2025. So I got most likely at the top, least likely at the bottom. We'll kind of go over each one. So starting with number 6, I think pretty self-explanatory is RB. RB, of course, have 1 seat available. They signed Yuki Tsunoda last week. This is going to be a seat that's either going to be Daniel Ricciardo or Liam Lawson. We don't know which one it's going to be yet. But traditionally it's a seat reserved for Red Bull junior drivers. Don't see them really ever having an interest in Ocon. Next, we're going to go to Aston Martin. Now, normally I think Aston would be an interesting spot for most drivers. It's a decent car. It's not really one of the back 5 teams, and they will be the Honda Works team from 2026. but we know that Lance Stroll has basically rights to that seat for as long as he wants it. And the silly season talk, despite the fact that it's not officially confirmed yet, has been very, very quiet on that second seat at Aston Martin. Sainz hasn't been connected with it at all. Other drivers, Gasly, Bottas, haven't been connected with it at all. So it really feels like it's Stroll's if he wants it, and if he doesn't, then that's a problem for a later point. So really, assuming Stroll stays for 2025, again, not really a realistic option. Then we get to the fourth one. I think this one's interesting. That's Mercedes. For Ocon, he was of course a Mercedes young driver, and I remember 2018 there was a lot of talk about him potentially replacing Valtteri Bottas at Mercedes for that year. Bottas of course had a pretty poor 2018. That didn't really come to pass, and he ends up going to Renault. Now of course Mercedes have an empty seat, but I think really at this point in time it feels like that seat's reserved for Kimi Antonelli. If his F2 season falters, he needs more time, then that might be a story that picks up again later in the year. But definitely one that would be of interest. Now we have, I think, the top three, and these are the ones I think are really more realistic. And of those, I think the least likely is Williams, and that's almost precisely because of those comments by James Vowles saying that he wants someone who he knows is going to be a team player. For Williams, I think it would be an interesting fit. I think really two drivers, if he was paired up with Albon, it would be two drivers with very, very similar abilities. That being said, we know based on those comments, I think perhaps not the best fit. Now we're going to number 2, and that is Sauber/Audi. So I think this is going to be one of the ones I think is more likely. We know that Ocon is on Audi's basically shortlist, kind of after Sainz, after Hulkenberg. Hulkenberg we know is already signed there, so Ocon is in theory the number 3 guy on that list. Could be an interesting fit, would be a works team going forward for 2026, and I think Ocon is still young enough that he could deal with kind of being with a rather slow team for 2 to 3 years, and then as they kind of build up as an engine manufacturer, I think he would still be young enough that he could reap the rewards of that partnership. And then we have the last one here, which is Haas, which I actually put as most likely, kind of rather unfortunately, but I think, for Haas, one seat I think is probably going to go to Behrman, and then they're going to want to have a veteran driver alongside him. And I think there's going to be quite a few drivers jockeying for that seat. You might have Bottas, Zhou, Gasly, and then of course you have Magnussen even, who's of course the driver there right now. So I think there's going to be a lot of things going on there. I think Ocon's one of the better options for that seat. I think it's probably not, from Ocon's perspective, I think he would probably want to get the Mercedes seat if he could. If that doesn't work, then probably Sauber, but I don't know if Sauber are going to want to take him, especially since it feels like for Sainz, a lot of his doors are closing, and for Sainz, it feels like Audi may be his best shot, which would of course leave that option not available to Ocon. So, but let me know what you think. Where do you think Ocon ends up at the end of the 2024 season? Where do you think he'll drive next year? Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.